I am really happy that everyone could join us today for another program in our resiliency series. Try and say that 3 times. So no matter where you work around the world, our goal is to help support your health and your well-being and enable you to be a role model of healthy habits for our clients and our customers. This is truly how we bring our mission to life together. It's in that light that we've invited Amy Blankson in to share her insights and research with us today. In today's session, Amy will introduce you to her work on happiness, highlighting research that shows that training your brain to be positive at work actually fuels greater success. Her work complements the thinking that we've shared in our Thrive Through Change program with some tools that can help to continue to develop the growth mindset that we've been talking about for the last year now, and to help you reorient your thinking and see the world in a more positive light, allowing you to react to change as a challenge rather than as a threat. Amy is the only person to be named Point of Light by 2 presidents. She received a presidential appointment to serve a 5-year term on the board of directors of the Corporation for National Service. Amy received her BA from Harvard and MBA from Yale School of Management. She then went on to co-found the Future of Philanthropy Conference at Yale University, and in 2007 joined GoodThink on the ground floor to develop and scale the company as it sought to bring the science of happiness to life. Drawing on over 17 years of management and consulting experience with businesses, foundations, and nonprofits, Amy Blankson brings both passion and practicality to GoodThink. She is currently doing research in partnership with Google to determine how to make positive psychology strategies stick and create sustainable positive change. Her client list includes Baylor University, Habitat for Humanity, and PBS Parents. It is truly my pleasure to welcome Amy here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you, and let me tell you why. Growing up, my father was a neuroscientist at Baylor University, and he once told me that the average scientific journal article is read by 7 people on average. And that includes probably the researcher's mom as well. So this is a wonderful opportunity to share the research that we're doing in the field of positive psychology with you and to give you insight into some of the latest and greatest research that's truly been transformative, both in my life and a number of people's lives that we work with. As I'm explaining to you today, I'm sure that many of you, I will be preaching to the choir, that the research I'm going to tell you about today will simply validate who you are and what you're already doing. But my hope is that it will give you some practical strategies that you can use with other individuals that you might be working with who can benefit from this research, both with your clients and maybe even with your families at home as well. So as we start today, I want to share with you a little bit about the research of positive psychology and the science of happiness and optimism. But before I do so, I want to share with you my definition of what we talk about with optimism. And we define optimism at GoodThink as the belief that your behavior matters. And sometimes when we start talking about this belief, people start to hear that word optimism or happiness and they get the wrong idea. A few years ago, my brother Sean he's the co-founder of GoodThink, and he was doing a talk out in California in Silicon Valley, and one of the individuals said, "Hey, can I take you to the airport? I'd like to talk a little bit more about how we can cascade this research out in our organization." So Sean said, "Sure, I'd love to go with you." And on the way to the airport, the entire time, the CEO's seatbelt dinger was going off. And finally, it just stopped, and Sean turned to the CEO, and he said, "You don't wear seatbelts?" And he said, "Oh, no, Sean, I've read your research. I love your book. I'm an optimist." And Sean thought, oh, no. Not wearing a seatbelt is what we call irrational optimism. And optimism, while it's great for many things, can't stop cars from hitting you, so please don't try that. The idea here is that we're trying to look at optimism through a lens of realism, not with rose-colored glasses, because the idea that the belief that your behavior matters is what truly transforms our ability and our outcomes, but we want to do so with a lens of rational optimism, because sometimes people tend to swing between two camps. Either they don't see the problems around them and therefore they do nothing to fix them, or they see all the problems around them and they think there's nothing they can do about them, and so they sweep them under the rug. But I think there's a better approach we can take to optimism, and that's one of realistic optimism, where we look at the world around us, not with those rose-colored glasses, but with a real intent and focus on what can we do with this information? How can we become more resilient, especially in times of uncertainty or change? A few years ago, we had the opportunity to start Good Think, and it was in 2007 when we began our research. At the time, it seemed like a horrible time to start a happiness company. We were in the midst of the greatest economic recession since the Great Depression, and there was any number of things happening, from the mortgage industry collapsing or facing bankruptcy. The auto industry was facing bankruptcy. Starbucks had started to downsize their coffee cups. What was there possibly to be happy about? But we had our first opportunity to take the research of positive psychology to a Swiss bank called UBS. And the UBS had just gone through a series of layoffs where they wound up laying off a significant portion of their workforce. There was a lot of uncertainty at the time. And so they brought in Good Think to speak to a room full of individuals who'd just been told that their job was safe, but they weren't going to be getting bonuses. And so the senior HR manager stood in front of the room and he's like, well, I know you're all a little disgruntled right now, but here's a speaker on happiness from America. And you can imagine how well that went over at the time. But fortunately, the tenor of what's happening in our culture is beginning to shift and change. And we were able to so successfully help UBS restart change forward progress in the midst of that uncertainty and change at that time, that they actually invited us to speak at every major banking institution UBS banking institution that they had around the world. And eventually we spoke at every other bank within Europe and the United States, from Bank of America to Citibank and so on. And I think what we really began to see happening at that point was that the hunger and the thirst for information about what makes people happy in spite of the recession, in spite of everything going on, had become stronger than ever. Now, 8 years into this research and over 50 countries later, we know that incorporating the principles of positive psychology into our work and our teams is the single greatest competitive advantage in the modern economy. It's why we've been invited to speak at all these banking institutions, and why we've spoken to farmers in Zimbabwe and a women's college in Dubai, and even children with cancer at St. Jude's, because a revolution is really beginning to take place around the world. And I think that as we go through this process, it's all about how we are using this research to help rethink the way that we are experiencing stress in the workplace. We know in times of uncertainty that stress is the #1 factor that keeps people from being as productive and feel as much satisfaction as they would like to have. So I don't know how many of you have also sat through a stress training. I've sat through a number myself, where somebody tells you just how bad stress is for you, how stress is debilitating your health and how it's making you less productive and less happy. And the whole time you're sitting there, you're thinking, I'm so stressed out and I have all this work piling up on my desk back at home. All I want to do is have people quit emailing me because they're destroying every organ in my body. So I think that that's exactly the tactic we knew we didn't want to take with our research on stress at Good Think. Instead, what we opted to do was we went back and did some more research at UBS, and we took a group of managers, divided them in two. And one group of managers, we wound up showing a 3-minute video on how stress was debilitating, the usual information that you hear about how it hurts your health and makes you more at risk for heart disease and makes you feel like you're aging faster. Maybe you are aging faster. The other group, we showed a 3-minute video to about less well-known research about how stress is enhancing. So we looked at how stress can actually help you to see threats in a different light. When you think about stress as a challenge instead of as a threat, it actually helps your body to be able to adjust to the fight or flight response differently. And instead of raising your stress levels, it helps your body to think, how can I overcome this this challenge that's in my environment as opposed to a threat that says I need to run away. And so those individuals, we showed the video that the stress was enhancing. And what was interesting about the research is that 3 minutes of intervention on stress training, just priming individuals to think about their stress as enhancing or debilitating, had incredible effects on both productivity as well as the ability to experience life satisfaction at work. And the results maintained their statistical significance for over 6 months after the experiment on stress. So what we see is that just simply training people a new way to think about stress gave them another language and another ability and an outlet to be able to fuel what they were already experiencing. Because we don't want to share that stress is not something that we're supposed to experience. We all experience stress, right? It's part of our daily work environment, something that we all have to deal with. But the way that we deal with that stress is actually vital to the way that we are able to be productive in the workplace. Hit the slide there. Uh-oh. Maybe you can help me forward the slide back there. Great, thank you. So one of the things that we learned through our research was that a positive and engaged brain is actually significantly more beneficial to you as an individual, with leading to 37% higher sales, 3 times higher creativity, 31% more productivity, 40% more likely to receive a promotion, 23% fewer fatigue symptoms, 10 times higher engagement, 39% more likely to live to age 94, which would be lovely, and 50% lower heart disease. Wow, right? So if we know this information, if this scientific research has been proven and exists, why are we not living this way? Why is this not something that all of us embrace and are running after with all of our strength? Because this research showing that a positive engaged brain is significantly better than the research on what happens to a negative brain. I think that so often we forget the importance of what positivity is. For so long, positivity has been seen as a soft word, particularly in the corporate environment. It's a word that we don't use in our vernacular, happiness, optimism. It seems so soft. But when you look at these results about what's able to be proven through a different mindset change, it's powerful, and it's something that will affect not only the bottom line of the company, but also your personal life satisfaction. So the study that we did on rethinking stress, we were able to actually publish in the Personality and Social Psychology journal, which was amazing because the president of Yale, Peter Salovey, he's become president since the time we did this research, but he was one of the partners on the research along with Stanford professor Aaliyah Crum and my brother Sean Acor. And the study was then published in the Harvard Business Review. And as an aside, the editors of the Harvard Business Review asked us about, when we published it, what kind of graphic art we thought would be great for this. And we said, the one thing we don't want you to do is to make it all smiley faces because we feel like this research should be taken seriously. And they said, oh no, we're the Harvard Business Review, we'd never do that. Clearly, they decided to take a different tactic in the end. But there's one problem that I see with this smiley face. Does anyone see what's wrong with it? Dollar signs for dimples, for sure. Anything else? There's no eyes. It's blind optimism, which is the very thing that I think we're trying to dispel with this research, that happiness is not about closing your eyes or lacking eyes altogether. It's very much about having our eyes open to the world, but rethinking the way that we see the world, to retrain our brains. So we're super grateful that they included our research in the Harvard Business Review, and very grateful for the opportunity to share the research globally with their extended reach. But we want to make sure to point out the importance of always keeping your eyes open with happiness, about being rational, having a realistic outlook when you're propelling the idea of happiness in the corporate workspace. What we see happening here at Good Think is that a revolution is really beginning to take place around the globe. It's part of why we've traveled so much to share this research all across the globe. And what we see is that happiness is beginning to take on this new political and economic significance, from the Kingdom of Bhutan, who's now looking at gross national happiness instead of the gross domestic product, to the United Nations that's created the International Day of Happiness and is starting to do a better job of measuring happiness alongside of other measures of success for nations around the world. Happiness is no longer just something that we talk about when we go to soft skills trainings. It's something that is absolutely required to be talked about in our modern environment because of so many factors going on in the world today. Sean spoke at the Pentagon a few years ago, and the leadership told him at the time that they would have never been able to have a talk on happiness a few years prior, and now they can't not have a talk on happiness because there's so much happening, particularly within the military, around health and mental health and depression, suicide rates, PTSD, that it's absolutely essential that these conversations happen. It's no longer optional. It's something that's required because it affects all of us on so much of a deeper level, not just performance-wise, but also creating a culture, an environment that we want to be part of. So to help understand how we got to this point in time, looking at why happiness is suddenly becoming acceptable in the corporate workplace, I want to share with you this cool new tool I discovered called Google Engrams, which is free. You can play with it yourself later if you want to. But an engram is what Google uses to search the lexicon of 5.2 million digitized books. So you can type in any word you want to. Here I typed in the word cell phone, and you can see how over time the use of the word cell phone increases in our lexicon along with the invention of the cell phone, which makes sense. And I did the same thing for the word internet. You can see how quickly it becomes available. You can also do it with the boy band NSYNC and see how quickly they rose and fell in our lexicon. But for the purpose of this talk here today, I typed in the word happy. And what's interesting about the use of the word happy is that long ago, long before the 1950s American dream, before the Industrial Revolution, before even the West was discovered, America was a nation that was interested in happiness. And over the course of 200 years, you see a steady decline in the use of the word happy. And if you extend this data to the latest available, which is 2008 in Google Engrams, you begin to see something fascinating happen. That beginning from 2000 to 2008, there's been a slight uptick in the use, actually quite a steep uptick in the use of the word happy, but it's still only half of what it was in the 1800s. And what I posit is happening is that happiness is beginning to mirror exactly what they found at Harvard Business School, at Harvard. When I was at Harvard in my senior year of college, I had the opportunity to take a course with Dr. Robert Putnam, who's been called one of the world's greatest social scientists. And he wrote a book that was a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called Bowling Alone, in which he posits that in the 40s and 50s, people used to bowl together in leagues. It was a way of creating a social atmosphere where families and colleagues got together and they bowled. And then a trend started to occur where people stopped bowling together and they started to bowl alone, which begins to create a mirror image of the social isolation that we see today. And we see the same thing happening with depression. As people start to isolate more and more, we see the depression rates have gone up and up. And in fact, at Harvard, we found that the Office of Career Services reported that 4 out of 5 students experience work-debilitating depression at some point in their 4-year career. Work debilitating, meaning they have to stop working because they're so depressed. And 10% of the students contemplate suicide. And this isn't just at Harvard, this is across the country at universities, and it's across industries as well. We've seen that over the last 10 years, depression rates have nearly doubled in the United States. And the impact of this is that we begin to see there's more social isolation, less social cohesion. And we argue that by prioritizing success so strongly in our society without educating about the importance of optimism and resilience and the way that we view stress, we're beginning to lose that social cohesion. And we want to recapture that by using the research of positive psychology to fuel a different way. We've been working for so long towards this rat race of mediocrity, right? That even the rats are falling off the treadmill left and right. What we see happening is that people need to constantly pursue the next goal and the next goal and the next goal. So what happens is that when your mind tries to reach for the goalpost of, say, getting good grades. I'll be happy when I get good grades. You get good grades, then your mind immediately jumps to the next goalpost. Oh, well, then I need to get into a good school. Then I need to get a good job. And then I need to get a promotion. And then I need to get that house with the picket fence and the 2.5 children, however that works. And so each time, the brain never experiences the feeling of happiness because it continues to move the goalpost for what happiness looks like. It pushes happiness over the cognitive horizon, and so your brain never actually gets there. So what we're discovering with the happiness advantage, it's a concept that my brother came up with in 2012, that with the happiness advantage, when you realize that the brain is actually better equipped to handle life when it's positive, that a positive and engaged brain is the secret to creating greater happiness. Because if you can raise someone's level of happiness in the present, they experience this feeling called the happiness advantage that gives them the economic and competitive advantage in our modern environment to be able to take their skills to another level in a way that other individuals are struggling to. Now, how does this work? Well, we know that dopamine creates a feeling of happiness, right? That's been well established. But what you may not realize about dopamine is that it actually turns on the learning centers in your brain, enabling you to adapt to the world in a new way. So when your brain is positive, it's actually opening up possibilities to you that you never saw before. It creates an opportunity for your brain to experience more options and opportunities to be more creative, and that's what leads to that those incredible statistics about how you're more productive and more creative, and you live longer, and you have less risk of heart disease. So today I want to share with you 3 research-based conclusions that are at the heart of this research. And at first, they're going to seem very simplistic, but I want you to dig in with me to the research to understand why these are so transformative and powerful. And the first research-based conclusion I want to share with you is that happiness is a choice. So what does this look like practically? So in business school, I remember a lot of my colleagues and I spent quite a bit of time looking for our dream job. In fact, on the very first day of orientation in business school, the dean stood up and said, your search for your next job 2 years from now begins today, so get started. And so everyone furiously started creating these Excel spreadsheets of dream jobs and who they were going to network with and how they would get to this position and where they would intern. And I remember that a number of my colleagues did actually find their dream jobs, which was amazing. But one of the things that nobody told us in business school was how to deal with when those dream jobs weren't always a dream, how to be happy in those positions. Because when the economy collapsed, people started to lose their job, or they didn't get their bonuses, or whatever might happen. And so we found ourselves unequipped to deal with the information about what do you do in that dream job when there's challenging times. And no one told us how a change in mindset would help us actually deal with those challenging times, or how stress could actually be something that could propel us further in our careers as opposed to holding us back, that that stress could actually become an opportunity for the future, with over half of the Fortune 500 companies actually coming out of the last recession. That was a statistic that just blew me away, to think that out of so much chaos and trouble became an opportunity for so many today who seized the moment and were able to transform the way they thought about that fall in the economy. So what we find is that happiness is the strategy, and it's a strategy that we actually have to cultivate in our careers. So a lot of times we get 2 questions at Good Think. A lot of people say, well, I just don't feel like I can be happy, that I don't feel like happiness is a choice, either because of my genes or because of the environment that I live in. So I remember back when all of my colleagues were looking for jobs in business school, I was so proud for them, so excited for them, but I also was going through a bit of a moment myself because my job search was a little different from theirs. My husband at the time had just gotten stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is not on the top 1,000 places I ever expected or wanted to live in my life. But he, are you from Biloxi? You're from Mississippi. I did wind up loving it. But I do remember at the time that this was my husband's first position in the military. So I was still in business school. He was sent down to Biloxi. And so we decided to go ahead and fully invest and move everything there. And so we bought our very first home, and we started to make friends with community. We got our first little dog, and we were just having such a wonderful time, really falling in love with Biloxi. It was one of my favorite places to live. And then three months later, Hurricane Katrina hit. And in the span of just 3 days, I wound up losing my house, I lost my community, and I lost my dog. And what felt like, it felt like the external environment was dictating whether or not I could be happy at that time, because I felt like so many things were out of my control that I just didn't know how to process that information. I once saw a photographer's work whose name is Chino Atsuka, and she does photoshopping work on photos of herself as a child with pictures of herself as an adult. So in each picture, that's her as a child and her as an adult. And the theme of her photos here is what I wish I knew back then. And what I wish I knew back then during Hurricane Katrina was the work of Sonia Lyubomirsky. Sonia Lyubomirsky is a preeminent positive psychology researcher who found that if you tell me how much money you make, where you live, how many kids you have, and where you went to college, I can accurately predict your happiness levels by exactly 10%. Because the other 90% of your happiness levels is determined by your genes and perception of the world, which means that it's this reason why so many people within the same room can have a different perception of exactly the same experience, because the way that you perceive the world completely shifts the way that you deal with that information, how you process it, and what you do with it. And so when I think about Sonia Lyubomirsky's work with the Gulf Coast, I think how transformative it would have been if I had known that information back then, that the damage and the destruction we saw at that time wasn't permanent and pervasive, but it was something that was going to become an opportunity for growth for me, for incredible growth, transformative growth in my life. And I wish that I could go back and share that message with the individuals on the Gulf Coast and wonder how the experiences would have been different for all of us down there who went through those experiences. Everybody in their lives goes through something similar to Hurricane Katrina. There's always some sort of upheaval. There's always something going on in people's lives, family members dying or passing away, incredible stresses in their lives. But this research is truly transformative for you to share with other individuals who can begin to take and harness the power of being able to reframe the information in your lives and the situations by looking at it in terms of the 90% and not the 10%. The other question we get is, aren't some people just naturally born happy? And this is where the research gets really fascinating, because the answer is yes. Some people are naturally born happier than other people. And yes, some people have childhoods that make it easier for them to choose happiness than other people. But that does not have to be the end of the story. I once had an identical twin come up to me at one of my talks, and usually identical twins are used to determine in psychology whether or not a factor holds true across genes or whether it's just nature or nurture, right? So when this twin came up to me, she explained that she used to be incredibly negative, and her identical twin sister was really negative as well, but she since has become very positive, and her sister hasn't. I said, well, what happened? She said, well, a few years ago, when I was 16, I was in a horrible car accident, and it changed the way I viewed life forever. My sister never had that experience, and so she's still incredibly negative. And so what you see is that even identical twins who go through these moments in life can use those experiences to transform and rise above their genes. Their genes do not have to be the end of the story. I love this picture of the identical twins. I think it really captures the essence of that story, that there's a different choice we have about how we can respond to situations. So what we call this is the third path. It's the path to rise above your genes and your environment, to rise above those moments where we feel like happiness is out of our control, to choose something where we actively make happiness a choice in our life. It's a strategy that we practice. And to show you how exactly that works, I want to do an experiment with you. And we call this the mirror neuron experiment, and nobody has to participate in my experiment. I I can't bring consent forms to my talks anymore after that last electric shock snafu. So if you want to participate, I just want everyone to partner up with somebody really quick. It's a short experiment. So find someone sitting next to you and partner up. And I'm legally required to tell you, you can't partner up with someone that you're married to or that you want to be married to. So you might need to shift around to somebody. Who needs a partner? Does everyone have a partner out there? One person over here. Does anyone else need a partner? Okay, you can watch on or you can participate alongside, whatever you wish to do. So for the purpose of this experiment, what I want you to do, actually first let me ask, how many of you in here have a background in psychology? 1, 2, 3. Okay, wonderful. So for the 5 of you, this is what we call the emotional prime. And for everyone else, this is absolutely nothing. So for the last several decades, you have been developing your self-control and personal discipline. It's what makes you as effective as you are today, right? So what I want you to do for this experiment is to use all that self-control and discipline to control yourself for just 7 seconds, which should be easy, right? So at 8 seconds, you can do whatever you want to or with your partner, but for 7 seconds, keep it together for me. So person number 1, I want you to not get angry with person number 2 when they do to you what I'm about to ask them to do to you, okay? Person number 1, please get within striking distance of person number 2. Excellent. Actually, person number 1, what I need you to do is to do actually absolutely nothing. I want you for the next 7 seconds to control yourself, your face, showing no fear, no flinching, no frustration, no emotion, okay? Person number 2, I want you to turn and face person number 1 in the eyes, and I want you to look up into their eyes, smiling as warmly and genuinely as you can for 7 seconds. Go. All right, stop. Some of you were horrible at that. Person number 2, I didn't realize you were the one with all the power in the situation and the control. So I want to switch that around for just a second. Person number 2, I want you to show person number 1 how to control yourself, showing no fear, no frustration, no flinching. And person number 2, I want you to retaliate by looking person number 1 in the eyes. Did I get that right? Person number 1, smiling as warmly and genuinely as you can for 7 seconds. Go. Okay, stop. Okay, so failure in this experiment means that you smiled. How many of you out there failed miserably? Uh-huh. How many of you successfully did what I asked you to do? 1, 2, 3 people. So that's terrible, but not completely that surprising. Almost everywhere we go, we've done this experiment, everywhere from the NBA to the Federal Reserve. And what we find is that generally 80 to 85% of individuals in the room cannot control themselves for 7 seconds, which is amazing, right? Because we all know that that's what makes us as successful as we are today, right? But for some reason, our bodies are literally unable to control ourselves for 7 seconds. And the reason why is called the mirror neuron effect. And like these adorable monkeys here, the monkey looking at the person sticking his tongue out, you see that something incredible happens in the human face that changes how we're wirelessly connected to one another. And it's called the mirror neuron. Mirror like you're looking in the mirror, and neuron like a tiny part of your brain. So what happens is with the mirror neuron effect is that as your body starts to see somebody in your visual cortex smile, your brain lights up. And it says, Amy. For me, it says, Amy, you're smiling. And I say, no, I'm not. And before I know it, my face is contorted into a smile. And I'm like, you traitor. But what happens is that your mirror neurons begin to take over, making you think that you're the one smiling, even though you actually saw someone else smile. How many of you saw your partner's lips start to quiver a little bit while they were doing the experiment? Okay. Okay, that's weird. I'm just kidding. What's actually happening there is called the mirror neurons are fighting against your motor neurons, which means that your motor neurons are like, I'm not going to smile, I'm not going to smile. And as they start to fight against the mirror neurons, your lip starts to actually quiver, which is amazing, right? So what's happening is that as you're communicating silently and wirelessly with each other, your mind and your body are actually playing a tug of war a little bit. But before you even know it, your brain starts to take over your muscles, which is incredible. And why this is transformative for us is because just like your mirror neurons can spread positivity in a room through smiles, so can stress and negativity spread. If you've ever been in a room where you see one person start to yawn and another person start to yawn, it's not because you're boring. That can't possibly be it. It's simply because the mirror neurons are beginning to ripple not only yawns across the room, but also smiles or also potentially stress and negativity. We find that stress is, I actually call it secondhand stress, because just like smoke, it can have negative effects on the people in the room around you. And I'm sure all of you know somebody who who's so negative that they can literally be toxic in your environment. And whether that is somebody at work or otherwise, I think oftentimes we try to adopt a perspective of, okay, if this person is causing so much negativity in my environment and it's bad for me, how am I going to be able to cut them out? Like, I won't talk to them, or I won't look at them, or I'll try not to hang out with them, which can be really awkward if you're married to that person. So I think that maybe the science is a little bit more powerful than that. I think that there's another way that we can deal with this information, and that's by using the mirror neuron effect to our benefit. By buffering our brains wirelessly with some very simple tips and tricks, I can teach you some strategies that can help you really begin to deal with that stress and negativity in your environment that buffers you against the stress in your environment and also begins to wirelessly ripple change to those around you. We call this positive intelligence, the skill set to be able to transform that negativity into positivity. And what we found is a Gallup study across disciplines found that 25% of job success is determined by IQ, which makes sense. But what is surprising is that the other 75% of your job success is attributable to 3 different factors that you may or may not be aware of. The first is your optimism levels. The second is your level of social support. And the third is your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. Those 3 factors determine 75% of your job success within the environment, which is important if you are into hiring and you are picking out team members for your team. To hire specifically for those 3 skill sets is the fastest way to be able to pick individuals who are going to be successful in your environment. We found that's one of my favorite researchers from the Yale School of Management. Her name is Amy Rosinski. And Amy researches a concept called job career calling. And to study this, she went to the Yale New Haven Hospital and she asked a group of janitors, who I imagine have a very difficult job, to self-identify whether they saw their work as a job, merely a paycheck, as a career, like a stepping stone to the next job, or as a calling, a personal mission or meaning behind their work that they connected with. And of all the janitors, there was one individual who connected to his work as a calling. And so Amy went to go visit him in the hospital. And as they're meeting, they're in a coma patient's room, and the janitor is literally straightening the pictures on the wall. And Amy says, "Why are you doing that? The individual's in a coma." And the individual said, and the janitor said, "Because when they wake up, I want it to be to a healthier, happier room." The janitor saw himself as part of the larger medical team, that even though his actual task might have been mundane, he connected it to something very personal and something that he felt drove his own personal internal motivation to continue to take the best care of the patient that he could. So what we see is that individuals who have that connection to calling with their work are that much more effective, as well as that much more likely to receive promotions in that environment, because people see that connection. They see that this individual will work harder and longer and faster and try with more heart than the other individuals. That positive intelligence is what drives people to want to make happiness a choice. And it's something that I want to challenge each of you as you're thinking about your jobs. Is it a job? Is it a career or is it a calling? And how does that change your outcomes at work as well? So we've talked about how happiness is a choice. You can rise above your genes and your environment by making happiness a strategy and a choice that you make in your life. And the second research-based conclusion I want to share with you today is that happiness is a habit. Now, a lot of times when we start talking about happiness habits, some people bring up very accurately, well, can't happiness be overdone? Of course, absolutely, yes, it can. Sometimes optimism is the reason that people make major mistakes, like they take risky career moves, or they invest with an irrational exuberance, or they agree to take on more things than are humanly possible and then quickly find themselves overwhelmed, right? We actually find that pessimism plays an important role in our work, that it helps us to critique what's happening in the system so that we can make it better. We find that pessimism also helps us to think and pause just a little bit before we jump off of a cliff and try to run off and do things that maybe we should have taken an extra moment to think about. So what I'm not trying to say here is to overdo optimism or only see optimism. What I'm talking about, again, is the scanning the world for the positive, but keeping an eye on what's happening, both positive and negative, so that you can keep a pulse on what's really going on in life. So to illustrate this, the human brain is a single processor, meaning that it can actually only process a few bits of information at any given time, specifically 40 bits of information. But at any given moment, the body is receiving 11 million bits of information. So imagine trying to pick out 40 snowflakes in a blinding snowstorm and trying to see those little bits. That's what your brain is trying to do each and every second. So your brain is scanning the world for those 40 bits of information. And if you fill up those 40 bits of information with all the stresses, the hassles, and the complaints in your environment, your brain literally has no power left to be able to scan the world for the positive, the meaningful, the things that add good to your life. And so what I want to encourage you here to do today is to begin training your brain to scan the world for the positive, recognizing that you don't have to look at only 40 bits of information, but simply giving priority to the positive. So if you're looking at 40 bits, aim for 21 bits of information that are positive, or maybe 22. But to keep a pulse on the fact that we're not trying to sweep things under the rug, we're not trying to close our eyes from seeing what's really going on, we're just trying to give priority to the positive in our environment. And the way that we do that to train our brains is through some very simple habits. And at Good Think, we've worked really hard to find the 5 quickest habits that you can put into your life in under 2 minutes that will make a sustainable and significant change in your life. And so everywhere we go, from the White House to working with the oil industries in Dubai, we go through these same 5 habits with individuals, and we ask them to take 2 minutes a day for 21 days in a row to create a new lifelong habit. The reason why we say 21 days is because William James, the father of psychology, once said that it took 21 days to create a lifelong habit. And so we're aiming for those 21 days to make a sustainable change in your life. And I'm going to walk you through these 5 habits real quick, and my hope is that you'll take to heart one of these habits to begin to put into action in your own life. So the 5 habits are journaling, gratitude, conscious acts of kindness, meditation, and exercise. And at the end of my talk, I'll put up a slide where you can get a free download of those points. So if you don't want to have to scribble down, or you don't have a pen on you, I can get you a copy of those as well. So the 5 habits, I'll walk you through a little bit more carefully what I mean by each of them. Now, for journaling, what we ask you to do is to take 2 minutes a day to simply write down one meaningful experience you had over the last 24 hours. So you don't need to write a long journal filling in from the last time you wrote in the 1980s to catch up on life. The goal, not that I would ever do that, the goal is simply to write about that one meaningful experience. Why was it meaningful? What were you doing? Who were you talking to? It'll probably wind up being a short paragraph, but the idea here is that you're teaching your brain to scan the world for the most meaningful point in your day. And by writing that moment down, your brain actually doubles the experience because the brain can't tell the difference between actualization and visualization. So by writing down that moment, your brain's actually reliving that moment again. And if you do this for even 3 days in a row, your brain starts to see connection points of meaning that create a stream of consciousness throughout your life that really begin to show that you have more meaning than you ever expected in your life. They did this experiment, a researcher named Penny Baker at the National MS Society, and they had individuals with chronic pain journal for 6 weeks, and they found that 6 months later, they were able to drop the pain medication by 50%. 50%. And that's simply through journaling. And that's simply the idea being that by being able to identify those meaningful moments, it helps the brain to overcome the other sorts of pain that they're going through and creates a different pattern for their brain to scan the world for. Now, the second habit is gratitudes. For this habit, we ask that you take 2 minutes a day to write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And it has to be 3 different things you're grateful for each day. And we did this experiment once at American Express. And after the end of the experiment, there was literally no change among the individuals. And so we looked back at the data of what had happened. And everyone had written down literally the same 3 things every day. I'm thankful for my job, my health, and my family. And it had no effect. And the reason why was because the brain had to do no work to think of those, right? We're training your brain like a muscle. So you want to be able to scan the world in your environment to look for 3 meaningful and new different things every single day. And what we found is Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, says that practicing gratitudes is the single greatest way to trump your genes. So if you or someone you know are one of those people who might have been born a little bit more negative, being able to practice these gratitudes, either yourself or around someone who's experiencing that, is the most significant way to bolster their mood and attitude around you as well. The third habit is acts of kindness. These are conscious acts of kindness, not random acts of kindness. And what we ask you to do here is to take 2 minutes a day to stop and thank or praise someone in your social support network just for being wonderful, for being awesome. So a lot of times we'll encourage people when they first get into the office, before they do any email, before they answer their phone or check their voicemail, take 2 minutes to shoot off a text or an email saying, hey, thank you so much for filling in for me yesterday, or for leading that awesome meeting, or telling a spouse or a child, I really appreciate you. And what begins to happen here is that not only do you walk around the rest of the day thinking that you're awesome because you did that, it gives you a little personal boost, like I'm the kind of person who does this stuff, but it also begins to increase your social support network, which is the breadth, depth, and meaning of your relationships in your life. The social support network we found is as predictive of how long you'll live as smoking, obesity, and high blood pressure. Social support is huge. So you can imagine by doing conscious acts of kindness for 21 days in a row, you extend your social support network or deepen it by 21 individuals in your life, which is powerful. I actually recommend that if you want to do this is one of the harder habits to do, but the most powerful of all 5. I suggest that you write down 21 individuals on a quick list so that every day that you want to do this, you don't have to think about who you're going to thank. You've already got it written down, and it just short circuits that process so that you can start to do it. We also find that this is a great way to start off meetings at work. So if you're leading a team meeting and you want to set the tone or prime the individuals in your office, that being able to start off with some conscious act of kindness or a thank or a praise for someone is a great way to set that tone. We fight so hard against the negative in our environments that sometimes we forget how powerful just 2 minutes can be in our environment. The fourth habit that I want to share with you is meditation. And I know meditation can be a loaded word, but for this habit, what I want you to do is, or what I mean by this, is to take 2 minutes a day and just to focus on breathing in and breathing out. And if your mind starts to wander, you just focus again on breathing in and breathing out. And the reason why we do this is because we're trying to help the brain go from multitasking to single tasking, so that then we can go back to multitasking more effectively, which we all know we're going to do, right? Even if you're excellent at single tasking for a moment, our cultural process of and even corporate expectations is that we will multitask. So being able to multitask more effectively can be one of the strongest predictors of how well you'll be productive at work. So if you meditate in the morning, it actually helps you throughout the day to stay on task better because you're thinking more intentionally and more focused about each task that you're doing. We found that individuals who meditate increase their accuracy by 10%. And this is really cool. Individuals who meditate actually improve the stress levels on their team of individuals who aren't even meditating, which is the mirror neuron effect. So you meditating helps lower the stress of other team members who don't even know that you're the one meditating, which is pretty impressive. The last habit I want to share is exercise, which we all know we're supposed to be doing, right? This is the one habit that we recommend you do for 15 minutes a day instead of 2 minutes a day. But the reason why we recommend this habit is different from what you might have heard. Exercise gives the brain a cognitive boost. You know that part. That it helps you, when you exercise in the morning, it helps you be better at dealing with your inbox at 2 p.m. in the afternoon because you've got more energy to do so. But we also found that 15 minutes of exercise a day is the equivalent of taking an antidepressant for the first 6 months. 2 years later, we also find that it has a 30% lower relapse rate. Now, I want to be clear that doing exercise, we're not advocating that exercise is a replacement for antidepressants. I think those play a very, very important role in society. But what I do want to point out is that exercise can be a starter drug for positive habits in your life. That it becomes one of those that when you start to exercise, it creates a cascade of other positive habits because that cognitive boost you experience is the very thing that makes you feel like your behavior matters so that all the other habits you try actually boost as well. So we know that these 5 habits, that journaling, gratitude, acts of kindness, meditation, and exercise are wonderful habits to start with. But we know that if I stand up here and give you all this information, it's not necessarily going to translate into transformation, right? My brother gave a talk at a private equity firm a few years ago. And in the middle of his talk, this one individual stood up and he said, yeah, I know that gratitudes are good for you and all, but you had to go to Harvard to learn that, seriously? And he sat back down. He must have been a Yaley or something. But what I think was interesting was that he's right. He's absolutely right. We all know that gratitude is good for us, right? It doesn't take an Ivy League degree to get to that. But what we don't know is how to get those habits to stick and how to begin to really inculcate them into our lives in a ways that creates a sustainable, lifelong habit, because information doesn't necessarily translate to transformation. So my goal here today is to share with you some strategies for how you can sustain that change in your life. What's interesting is after that talk, the senior manager in the room came over to Sean and he said, you remember that individual who stood up in the middle of your talk? And Sean was like, yeah, I do. And he said, what's fascinating about that is that particular individual is the most toxic person we have on staff. Everywhere he goes, it's like a rain cloud follows him. And it's awful because he's the smartest analyst I have, but he's toxic. Every team I put him on starts to perform lower. People even leave the organization because they don't want to have to work with him. So even though this fellow knew about gratitude, he clearly hadn't begun to embrace it in his life, which is a 180-degree shift on what we need to be learning in our lives to really begin to make this something that has all the positive benefits that we want to strive for. Now, if you're like me, sometimes I need an additional boost to help me stay with my habits, and I found this fabulous app called Happify that lets you track your habits over time. It helps you put in your habits, gives you a social support network if you want, and will continue to remind you, hey, have you kept up with your habits? So if you're looking for a free resource, I love that one to be able to start with. So the third research-based conclusion I want to share with you today is that happiness spreads. So we talked about how happiness is a choice, and it's a habit we can practice. And the last habit is that happiness spreads. And the reason I know it spreads is because there's something interesting called social scripts in organizations. A social script is a sort of behavioral norm that we expect in our lives to dictate our behavior. So we all have gotten on elevators, right? And it's awkward. It's you and one other person in the elevator. And what do we all do? pull out your cell phone. You try not to look the other person in the eye because it'll make the other person feel awkward, or it'll make you feel awkward. You don't know what to say exactly, so maybe you look at your shoes or you look at your cell phone. That's a social script that's kind of in place, right? If you looked somebody and stared them down in the elevator, they would feel really awkward about it, so we try to avoid that. But there's social scripts at place in the workplace that can either be very positive or very negative, and so raising our awareness about those social scripts can be the key to beginning to create a culture of positivity within the organization. So this one organization out in Silicon Valley had a room called the Dungeon, and it was a basement conference room with no windows. This is a different picture, but the actual one had no windows. It was just dark and dank. Nobody liked to work down there. And so one day, this one employee decided to have his kids paint a butcher paper mural of some sun and flowers and some clouds to brighten up the room. And he hung it up in the room, and everybody was loving it until this one individual went to the HR department and was like, "You've got to take that thing down. It looks like a kindergarten in here. I can't get any work done. It's just too silly." And so the next day, the HR manager took the picture down, and there was an outrage. All these people started to say, "Hey, I was really appreciating the fact that somebody tried to brighten up the space." There was so much outcry that the CEO himself came back the next day, and he hung the picture back up in the room. I think what happens here is that sometimes we let one negative person in our environment begin to write the social script for everybody else. Why do we let one person write the social script for us, right? So what we're trying to do is create a social influence where the strength and the number of individuals who are positive outweighs that one negative individual, so that you're setting an expectation, a social script within your environment that we want to encourage positivity, that we want to encourage people to provide social support to each other, that we want to lend an opportunity for people to think about stress differently, that stress doesn't always have to be a threat. It can be a challenge that we work through together. So rethinking those social scripts gives us a few opportunities. And we found in a research study that Good Think did with Training Magazine about 2 years ago that 58% of people say that a negative social script blocks their productivity in the workplace. 58%. We also found that 90% of individuals felt like they were more positive than the other people in the room, which was kind of humorous, which means that at least 40% of the pessimists in the room thought they were more optimistic than the other pessimists, which will make your brain hurt to think about that one. And the last statistic we found was that 31% of individuals felt like they were positive but not expressive of their positivity, which we call a closet optimist. It means that this individual is already positive, but they just don't express it because they don't think it'll be received well, which has some important implications for those of you who are managers in this room. That for those of you who manage, number one, it's important to recognize existing social scripts so that you can consciously shape what you want them to be, so that you can be thoughtful about what might be being conveyed or said in unspoken words, that you can change that messaging. Number two, it means that if you're a closet optimist, you're not alone. You have a 1 in 3 chance that you're running into another closet optimist out there who might also want to express positivity. So it should give you some encouragement to go ahead and express your own views on the world. And number three is that if you are a manager, you can activate those optimal optimists or closet optimists to really begin to create change in your environment. They're the low-hanging fruit. You don't have to change their mindset. All you have to do is tell them it's okay to express your mindset and your viewpoint, and you begin to see that you can shift the emotional plane. You can tip the emotional plane in your organization to become a more positive community. So change in this environment starts with you. So often we wait for corporate headquarters to mandate something to happen, to create a global policy for which you can jump on board or to begin to work alongside. But change with social scripts begins very simply. It starts with you recognizing a social script and rewriting it. It could start with simply waving to somebody around the room, or as Ochsner Health Systems did, they actually started a policy called the 10-5 way that they adopted from the Ritz-Carlton. And the 10-5 way said, it was simple. All they did was train staff. If you get within somebody within 10 feet, I want you to smile at them. And if you get within 5 feet, I want you to say hello. very simple. Cost almost nothing for the organization. But what they found was that within the first year, the individuals, they found that patient referrals to the hospital had increased significantly. They found that doctor satisfaction levels had increased for the first time in a decade. And they found that their bottom line revenue had gone up 0.1%, which doesn't sound like much, but for a billion-dollar organization, it gave a whole new meaning to the idea of the million-dollar smile. That simple change of just smiling and saying hello to people in the environment was one of the best corporate strategies that they had ever put into place, and it was free. So I think that there's some very simple things that we can begin to do and that you can begin to do at Cigna. My hope is that as you go through today, and we've talked about these 3 different research-based conclusions, that happiness is a choice, that happiness is a habit you can practice through picking up a new habit, whether it's journaling or gratitude, acts of kindness, a meditation or an exercise. My hope is that you'll walk away here today thinking of one thing you want to do differently in your life. Because if you walk away here and you do nothing different in your life, you've wasted the last hour. You're not going to benefit from the mindset change that you've just heard, and you've invested your time in already. So take the opportunity now to pick one of those 5 habits and to really begin to start to create change in your life. Track it. Check in with your colleagues and see how are they doing. Are others trying to do the same habit you're doing? And begin to create a ripple effect of change within the organization, starting with you. So I want to pause here today. I'm going to share with you, this is the slide with the information for where you go to get the free PDF download, just goodthinkinc.com/takeaways. And it'll ask you for your email, and then it'll download a free PDF sheet of something that you could hang up in your office if you wanted to, that'll talk about the 5 strategies and how to remember to do it. So I want to pause here, though, so that we could have some time for questions, because I think question and answer is the best time for you to begin to absorb and put this information into practice in your life. So I'm going to pause. I think Catherine's going to lead the question and answer for us.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you are connected to the video stream, you can ask a question by typing in the box under the video window and clicking submit. If you are connected by phone, you can ask a question by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad.
I'll just say, too, as we get started, we started late, so we're running just a little bit late. So we have time here with Amy for anybody who can stay and continue the dialogue. But, of course, if you have other commitments, you are welcome to depart, leave us, and we will share good optimism with you at some later point. So we do have a microphone here. We're trying to capture these on video. So as you ask questions, if you want to take the microphone, that'd be great. Oh, John, can't you ask a question, John, before you go?
I actually can't ask a question. So, Amy, thanks for being with us today. I was actually curious why some of the research on happiness has not made its way to higher education as much as you would expect. You see all this problem on, I have a daughter in college, so this stuff, I think about this stuff. You see all these things that happen, with suicide rates in college going up, particularly at the kind of schools you went to and so forth, but others as well. And it seems like it ought to be easy to make changes in some of the things that they do on campus to raise the stress levels. None of that happens. They talk about it a lot, about what they want to do, but I don't see much action actually occurring. Any insight?
Absolutely. So I just went to Harvard Business School about, I think it was just about a month ago, and I was amazed and excited to see that they have not only an entire division of the HR department that was focused on wellness, but that they actually had 2 student leaders who'd been elected to lead the student body on a platform of mental health and wellness for the entire group. And so I think that the organizational shift takes a lot longer than an individual leader shifting the culture. So I was most excited about the student leaders taking that on, because they're the ones who can influence their colleagues the fastest. From an institutional perspective, yes, absolutely. I think things should be changing faster and more thoroughly. It shouldn't just be Wellness Week. Maybe it should be wellness all year long. But the idea that the conversation is beginning to happen is heartening. I think that people are aware now that it's something that they can't sweep under the rug. I know one of my college roommates actually attempted suicide, and she was quickly ushered away from school before anybody talked about it, and it was kept very hush-hush. So when I spoke with Harvard Business School, I said, is that still going on? And they said, no, now that when they have an incident like that, they'll actually bring in counselors. They have a number of follow-up conversations. They invite the individual to stay in constant communication. So I think subtle tweaks like that are beginning to happen, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a lot of people pushing for that kind of change, particularly as parents of college students. I would really encourage you to keep pushing for it. And I know you have to go. Thank you for staying.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about the longevity of as people kind of go through the beginning processes of making these habits. Is it like a vitamin that you continue to take it every day, and as long as you're taking it, you feel the benefits? Or is it something that you can, as an organization, immerse your culture in initially, but then down the road continue to see the positive effects that you're sharing?
Great question. Thanks, Tricia. So I think that after working with Good Think now for 9 years, I can personally attest to the fact that I can know this research and try things for 21 days, and sometimes I'll slip and I'll start to get in a really negative mindset. We go through these ebbs and flows in life, right, with life circumstances that makes it sometimes easier and sometimes harder. So even if, I wish there was a happiness pill, I bet you somebody's working on it out there. But I think that it's something that is a work ethic. It's something that we continually have to keep coming back to. I once heard a tightrope artist talk about how when he is walking on a tightrope and he's trying to balance, that he is literally thinking of 100 different things he could do to adjust for the differences in his balance. And so my hope and goal would be that I would have 100 strategies at my disposal. When I start to feel a little bit more depressed, I've got a number of things to try before I get to that dark place, or before I get to that super stressed out place. So I like that idea of finding your balance, but knowing that you're never going to be 100% steady. Our goal is not to be always happy. I think that would actually be more of a sickness than a health thing. The goal is to be able to pull out the positive and respond to life in the best ways we can, knowing that sometimes grief and sadness are a really important part of life, but that when we hit those moments, we also have a way to come back to our true north to figure out where we're going. Yeah, thanks.
Hi. My question is around how your work intersects with some of the work that's been done on employee engagement. So I know you referenced Gallup and some other productivity benefits that can be seen by the increase in employee happiness. I know historically, at least at Cigna, when we've been looking at employee engagement, we actually haven't necessarily focused as much on that happiness component. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like there's a shift. So thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I know from personal experience, we've worked with a number of organizations now on tying happiness metrics into the engagement survey, because you don't really want a whole separate happiness metric, and then you have to take the engagement metric as well. So we're trying to tie the two together more. Typically, what I've seen with engagement surveys is that organizations will have one question related to happiness, if at all, maybe two, but that there's not really the robustness of information that comes from being able to really dig down and understand not just happiness as a flat concept, but that there's a lot of depth and behind the emotion of happiness. So we worked with Google in the Noogler program. Those are the new Google employees as they were onboarding them, and we ran this 40 metric study about happiness specifically. And what we found was that by focusing on that metric and building it into what they were already doing for studying people analytics, that it actually shifted the way that they ran the orientation. So by paying more attention to it in engagement, it changed the actual content delivery to get to that point, if that makes sense. And it really began to make quite a difference. They found after the 4-week orientation for Nooglers that the individuals, they found some interesting information. Like before, they knew that individuals who came into Google thought once they got a job at Google, they were going to be happy forever and ever, and they were so excited. And then week week 2, they found by repeating the survey that the individuals began to self-doubt, that they felt like they were the least creative person, that there's no way they were going to be able to rise in the ranks, the job was too big. And by the end of the 4 weeks, they were able to look back and say, oh, I see now that my health is suffering a little bit, but I'm really beginning to feel the sense of meaning about my work, and I love the transparency with my colleagues. So by really teasing out that information, it provided a lot more insight, not only for whether or not the employees were happy, but actually deeper on metrics about how effective was their training, was their focus on stress and resilience training, how much did they need to focus on communication at this point in their career versus maybe a more seasoned employee or a part-time versus a full-time. So there is some work tying it in, and I do think the people analytics at Google is doing some really fascinating work that might be worth checking out. But I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I was also talking with Jill and Tricia at breakfast this morning that sometimes studying happiness specifically on engagement surveys can be tricky, because nothing makes employees more unhappy than if you tell them that they're the least happy person. It's this weird dynamic where it can really make someone feel worse about their experience rather than better. So the way that you roll out information like that is very sensitive and thoughtful when it comes to happiness, as opposed to just whether or not you feel like you have friends at the organization. And I'll add one more quick note there, that we found that the provision of social support is as important, if not more important, than receiving social support in the organization. So there's some interesting ways that you can tie in existing engagement questions with slightly tweaked questions that relate back to happiness metrics that make it easier to study for the long haul. So, yeah.
Hi, Amy. I actually have 2 questions. Okay. So the first one is, have you gotten any feedback from individuals around which of the 5 habits are the easiest to put in place and maintain on a regular basis? Mm-hmm. And then part 2 is back to the guy that asked the question of your brother who walks around with a rain cloud. Yeah. What do you do in situations like that when you have an individual that clearly is bringing everybody else down, but you want to nonchalantly or discreetly make some subtle ways to change their mindset? Do you have any suggestions on how to work with an individual like that?
Absolutely. So your first question, which is the easiest, great question. I would say the 3 gratitudes is by far the easiest, because it's the most straightforward and it's the quickest. You could probably do it in 15 seconds if you were short on time. I have had individuals say, I actually had one individual tell me that they've been meaning to start the 3 gratitudes, but they had to go out and buy a gratitude journal first, and so they hadn't quite gotten to that yet. You don't have to write it down. You can think about it. You don't have to have a special book. I've actually had individuals who either do it over the dinner table or when saying prayers with their kids at night. Sometimes people will say a gratitude every time they get to a stoplight. I personally do that one because I get agitated, smidge of road rage, and so I try to practice my gratitudes to reshift my mental framework. But other people do it every time they touch a door handle or they cross a threshold. They'll say a gratitude. So I think the goal is not to be rigid about having to have a notebook to write down your 3 gratitudes. There's also some fabulous apps. I like there's a simple gratitude app that lets you keep a little picture and a long history of your gratitudes if you want to. But I think the simpler the better, right? The quicker, the more likely you're going to accomplish it. Whatever is easiest for you, try that. The second part of your question was about the individual at the rain cloud. How do we deal with individuals like that we want to subtly nudge for a different behavior? And I get this question at every single talk we go to. It's something very common because I think all of us struggle with that individual that we just don't know what to do with. It could be a curmudgeonly grandmother, or it could be a colleague, or it could be a child who's just teenager who's super negative. So what I like to recommend is that idea of social influence, about taking that idea of number and strength of influences and really being thoughtful about it. So if your family has 1 negative individual and 4 positive individuals, to talk to the 4 positive individuals specifically about trying to be more vocal about being positive, to model behaviors, because we see with the mirror neuron effect that even meditation and other practices that you personally have can wirelessly and quietly shape behavior. To be able to remove yourself from the situation is sometimes very important. If you can walk away or put on headphones if you hear somebody yapping in your ear that you don't want to hear, that can be useful. We call it noise canceling and Good Think, but it's the simple idea of getting like noise canceling headphones and tuning the person out. But I think the one approach that you want to be careful about is to not shove positive psychology down their throat. I think that it's one of those things that somebody has to get to on their own. And the most effective way that we've seen to get there is by teaching the science behind it. Even the greatest skeptics from Wall Street, private equity, bankers in Hong Kong I've spoken with, like a number of audience where I've been told these individuals don't believe in happiness. They think that it's soft, that they're not even happy to be here. And the moment that you start going through the science and explaining what happens to the brain and why it's important, those are the individuals who suddenly have a light bulb go off and start to want to bring it home to their family. So I wouldn't give up on anybody. I think that there's always room for improvement, but that social influence balance, knowing how it works, can make a huge difference. Yeah.
Hey, Amy, so this is a little bit of a follow-on maybe, and I think that a lot of times one of the challenges we see is sustainability, so it's really hard to create a habit, and it's also really hard to get buy-in when it's a mentality and it's tough to show tangible outcomes related to a mentality. So I'm just interested to know, we have a lot of these health-related outcomes, and with a lot of kind of evolving technology, smartphones that can take heart rate or other wearables, is there any research that ties the physiological impact for an individual to see more short term, almost as a quicker incentive that something real is happening, and it almost garners a quicker buy-in or reinforcement that their efforts are translating into outcomes?
Absolutely. So I just turned in a manuscript for an entire book on that. So I could go on for a long time on that topic, or I'd be happy to talk with you more after. Okay. But I called the book The Future of Happiness, and it'll come out next spring. But the idea is looking at how emerging technologies can shape our behavior for the positive and can actually increase our wellness and health. There are a number of apps out there that are meant for life logging or life hacking, where you can start to track your own behavior and see change over time. For those of us who are more analytic or who just like to see change, or even get like little awards or medals on your phone for doing a good job, there's a number of apps out there. There's Habit Tracker, Instant, Ad App. I can give you a whole long list of apps that you can try that are specifically used to measure behaviors and to track not just whether you did the behavior, how you felt about doing the behavior, whether it changed your sleep habits. So the idea is that these apps are shifting now from just tracking a behavior to correlating behaviors that can really provide insights that maybe Mondays you're feeling less happy because your commute is always longer because of X factor, so that you can then go back and kind of untangle or unravel why you might be more stressed on those days. I think that idea of tracking the micro decisions that we make in our day is one of the most effective and the biggest trends that's going to come out of the next 10 years in terms of happiness and wellness, because those technologies have never been available to us before, and now that they are, we have some new ways of understanding what's going on inside of ourselves as opposed to just looking on the outside observation. And I think it's going to be fun, it's going to be powerful, but it's also going to require a little bit more engagement on our part too.
Thanks.
Sure. Other questions? Anyone from the phone? Sure.
I really thought it was powerful when you were talking about the difference between job, career, and a calling. And I think at Cigna, I've been seeing us do a really good job in town halls and talking about no matter what your role is, you impact our customer and showing videos of the good work that we do and the impact it's having in customers' lives. But I'm wondering, do you have other suggestions as to how organizations help employees doing a variety of functions feel that calling or develop that calling and purpose?
That's a great question. I think that one of the most effective ways that I've seen connecting back has been putting visual reminders and messages around the building about that. So, for instance, Habitat for Humanity has a huge workforce of individuals who go out into the field every day to help build homes. You watch what they do and you're like, of course they feel happy because they're doing the hands-on work and they see the change and they see the people. But what the CEO, Jonathan Ruckford, told me was that there's an entire office staff who never get to go out to the field. They never see that. And so what they did was they put a sign and a placard right by the elevator. So every day as people were leaving from work, it said, thanks to you, I can't remember the exact number, like 500,000 more people are sleeping in a bed tonight. So just little subtle reminders about what difference those individuals are making. I also think showcasing some of the best ideas around the office is really fun. At MIT Media Labs, it's a little different. They've got the technology, beautiful technology to show off for people that people come through their building. And what used to be a very industrial workshop has now become almost a museum. So they've got like displays, beautiful color displays of the latest projects in action. But they were very intentional about setting up that information so that you could see that it was like a living lab. Everything they were doing was an experiment in action that they were trying, and they wanted to share and foster that kind of growth and personal connection to what other people are doing. It's not just some corporate initiative, it's something that, you know, Tricia is working on very specifically to develop, and we're really excited, and maybe your work will get featured too. And I think that there's some other subtle changes, like a number of organizations we've worked with, from Walmart to Nationwide, have all started gratitude walls. So it'll simply be like taking a bulletin board like that, sticking some Post-it notes beside it with a Sharpie marker, and telling people to post their gratitudes on the wall. And you would think, who is going to take the time to do this? But even at Walmart, they wind up clearing the board every single night because there's so many people who want to express their gratitude. And I think when you see those moments of gratitude, you connect back to the meaning at work. It seems less like it's a job because you're just getting your paycheck. If that's the only thing you ever receive from your organization, of course you're going to think that work is a paycheck. But if you're seeing a lot of meaning coming into your life, then you invest a lot more meaning back in as well. All right, I think that we might need to wrap up today for timing, but I want to thank you all for being a fabulous audience, for your questions. And if you have other questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer any more questions that you have. But I really do hope and encourage you to take what you've heard today, go share it with other individuals who weren't able to be here, and take it home to your families as well. So thank you so much.